Hey y'all, hope you're having a good day. So these are your phylum Cnidarian notes. The first thing I want you to notice is that the word Cnidarian, please notice that the C is silent. So just pretend that it's not there, and I'm going to explain why it's called that in just a second. So we're not going to say Cnidarian, just it's Cnidaria, okay, or Cnidarians. So the phylum name comes from the Greek word nyndos. Again, the C is still silent, and that means stinging nettle. And if you want to pause it right here and read a little bit about the stinging nettle and why it is analogous to the animals in this phylum, feel free to do so. I'm going to go ahead and click on. There are thousands of Cnidarian species. They live in the tropics to the Arctic poles. They can be found on the surface or the bottom. It's a wide variety. And there's even a few freshwater species like freshwater jellyfish. Remind me to tell you a story about that. So you're going to write down the stuff in white. Jellyfish, anemones, hydras, and corals are included in this phylum. They're called Cnidarians because they have tentacles, and those tentacles are lined with stinging cells called cnidocytes. Again, the C is still silent. The venom is contained in those, and so if you've ever been stung by a jellyfish, it's the venom that causes the sting and causes you to hurt. Just like sponges, they're only 2 cell layers thick. So they have a gastrodermis and an epidermis with a dead jelly layer in between called a mesoglia. Unlike sponges, however, these animals, their cells are organized into tissues. And so they have nerve tissue and muscle tissue. That allows them to move. And that's incredibly important in the evolution of animals. They do not, however, have organs or a brain. They're basically just muscle and a nerve net floating around in the ocean, basically relying on reflexes. They exhibit radial symmetry. We knew that already. There are 2 body forms. The first one, the one you're probably most familiar with, is the medusa. It's the mobile bell-shaped, just like the jellyfish, in which the tentacles hang downward. And the other one is called a polyp. The polyp tends to be sessile. Remember, that means immobile. And the tentacles around the mouth face upward. There's a real-life polyp, and there's a real-life medusa jellyfish. Okay, cnidocytes. Let's talk about the stinging cells. Again, don't pronounce the C. These stinging cells line all of the tentacles. So this would be a hydra. Here's its little mouth. It's got a gastrovascular cavity. And all these tentacles have all these little stinging cells, which we see here in orange. And so this is at rest. It means it hasn't been discharged. And then this is when it is discharged into the prey or an unknowing swimmer buyer like yourself. And this is what causes the sting, that thread and toxins that go with it. So there's just another diagram. Again, it's usually a prey item, or it could be your foot. So the cnidocytes line the tentacles. Each cell contains a small barbed harpoon-like structure called a nematocyst. That's the thing that pops out and stings the prey. Once the prey is neutralized, once it's caught up in the tentacles, it'll then be pushed into the gastrovascular cavity for digestion, in which nutrients are then absorbed into the cells lining the gastrovascular cavity called the gastroderm cells. There are 3 main classes. So the first class is hydrozoa. These are all based on body form. Hydrozoa are typically polyps. We're going to do a special case where there are some species that alternate their life cycles every other generation between polyp and medusa, but that's for a little bit later, just kind of FYI. Hydrozoa are usually found attached to rocks and shells and wharfs and piers, some sort of substantial substrate, and they can be colonial or solitary. Typically, they're marine. I'm going to give you examples of some hydrozoa. The first example is the freshwater hydra. We're actually going to do a lab with these guys. They're incredibly tiny. At best, they're the length of your fingernail, but they are animals. They exist only as a polyp. They are hunters, I guess, The other example is the Portuguese man-o-war. This is a marine example of hydrozoa, and they actually live in colonies that have both polyps and medusas. So what they're tentacles look like are really just a whole bunch of polyps connected together. And then they have this gas-filled medusa that they use as a float, just to kind of float along on the ocean surface. And here is one next to a flip-flop, just to kind of give you an idea of scale. So this is the gas-filled medusa, and these things that appear to be tentacles are all just polyps glommed onto each other. The second class is Scyphozoa. Scyphozoa. You can't pronounce that, maybe jot that down. Scyphozoa include true jellyfish. So by true jellyfish, we mean that there are jellyfish every generation. Again, they're typically medusae. They reproduce sexually. Special cases, some alternate between polyp and medusa. That's for a later date. The largest ever found was almost 4 meters in diameter, and the tentacles were 30 meters long. So just to give you an idea, your table is a little over a meter long. So imagine 30 tables. Yeah. All right. Our third class is Anthozoa, and these exist only as polyps. They include sea anemones, which are highly muscular, and they respond to touch, and also corals. Corals live in colonies called coral. They form coral reefs. They secrete an outer skeleton, again in quotes because we mean support system of calcium carbonate that protects them. So inside that hard calcium carbonate is a living coral polyp. But we usually don't see those. We usually just see the dead coral calcium carbonate shells. Just a couple pictures to end with. That's a sea anemone. That there is its mouth, and then here are all the tentacles. And then we have just a real pretty picture of a coral reef and some fish. That looks delightful. There's a little snail hanging out in there. And that's it. That's all I got for you.